For one family living in a largely Sunni area of Iraq, whose names we won't reveal, sectarian tensions recently proved deadly. The family head, a Shiite, attracted the attention of local militants. Groups came by the household with threats of violence and left menacing letters on their doorstep. Then one day, they did more.
It wasn't just a letter, it wasn't just people yelling at them. They actually had a bomb that went off right next to their house that blew up the room that had their infant child.
That's Ali Al-Sarraf, a second-year law student at the University of Southern California who's also the president of the USC chapter of the Iraqi Refugee Assistance Project. IRAP is an American organization that supports Iraqis who have been uprooted from their homes by the social, religious, and political ruptures following the 2003 invasion. Running on donations and grants, IRAP mobilizes law student volunteers and practicing attorneys to provide displaced, U.S.-bound Iraqis with free legal aid. It's urgent work. According to the organization, 2 million Iraqi refugees are scattered both within Iraq and across the Middle East, living without permanent homes or legal asylum.
They're in a limbo because they don't have any legal rights in the country that they're living in that they fled to, but they can't go back to Iraq because they'll face persecution.
The U.S. government supports refugees who are trying to move to America. Following the passage of the Refugee Crisis in Iraq Act in 2008, the U.S. Department of State began issuing special immigrant visas to Iraqis who face threats after working for the U.S. government for at least a year. But the routes to winning those coveted resettlement rights are notoriously winding. According to Kate Norland, a second-year law student and director of the IRAP branch at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, the unstable conditions following the U.S. invasion caused approximately 4.7 million Iraqis to leave their homes. Many fled to other parts of Iraq, while others went to nearby countries like Syria and Jordan. Norland says that the U.S. government has its own reasons for advancing the resettlement process.
The United States has signed up to take on a large role in that effort because we see, rightfully so, a certain responsibility for causing that crisis.
Besides the special immigrant visas, of which 5,000 are available yearly to those with successful applications, the U.S. government provides other ways for displaced Iraqis to resettle in America. The Refugee Crisis in Iraq Act also outlines a Priority 2 status refugee track for Iraqis who worked for the U.S. government and affiliated organizations. Displaced Iraqis may also apply for resettlement through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, or USRAP. Through this path, they must wait at least a year to apply for permanent residency once they've arrived. But relocation to the States isn't easy, even with these options. Al-Sarraf says that the special immigrant visas aren't keeping up with the demand.
So as of now, there should be about 20,000 Iraqis accepted through this program, but instead there have been under 5,000 who have been accepted, and it's not because of a shortage of applicants.
So, Norland says that part of IRAP's work is helping refugee applicants navigate a daunting bureaucratic maze.
If somebody's applying for a special immigrant visa, that's a very complicated 7-step process, and each of those steps has little sub-steps underneath it.
Norland says that IRAP volunteers help applicants with tricky details, like filling out forms, preparing for interviews, and for background checks. They also aid in writing statements of threat, which explain how the applicants were endangered back home. But nothing is certain, says Norland, even with a letter-perfect application.
One problem is that for the special immigrant visa process, there's no review. There isn't even a mechanism in place for administrative review.
If Iraqis who apply for resettlement rights through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program are denied, they can still submit a request to have their cases reviewed. Norland says that U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services may reconsider the application, even though no official appeals process exists. But Iraqis who follow the special immigrant visa path aren't given this chance.
If you apply for the same benefit of resettlement to the United States, but you do it through this special immigrant visa process instead of through the refugee program, you have no opportunity to appeal to any administrative body if you are rejected.
Norland says that Iraqi immigrants are often forced to apply twice, through the SIV process and the refugee program, in case the former attempt fails. It's a redundancy she finds problematic.
And that's a real shame because the SIV process was set up to make it easier for people who had a closer connection to U.S. forces, and therefore people who we maybe felt that we owed something more to.
Other aspects of the process prove equally challenging. These include an interview, which is meant to clarify the specifics of a refugee situation. Al-Sarraf says reliving the past may be especially trying for refugees with fresh memories of torment.
Many of them have post-traumatic stress disorder, and so they are unable to provide a clear version of their story when they're interviewed. And obviously that's due to the great mental stress that they're under from PTSD or other issues that they may have.
Al-Sarraf also says that the social dynamics underlying interview setups might discourage refugees from revealing crucial details.
You have situations, for example, where you have an Iraqi woman who is in an interview with, say, a male interpreter and a male interviewer, and she, by virtue of the fact that she, all the cultural ramifications of her being a female and having to tell them that she was raped while she was in Iraq.
And for applicants who can't open up, the odds of resettling are bleak. Kulsum Hassan, a law student and volunteer at the UPenn IRAP chapter, describes her current case. She's helping a man who was denied resettlement because he worked for the Iraqi military during the era of Saddam Hussein. But as far as she can tell, his involvement was strictly nonviolent.
He never held a gun, he never fixed a gun, he never killed anybody or was involved in any of the documented atrocities that the Iraqi army committed.
Hassan says that language barriers amplify the challenge of building a strong case. She remembers speaking with her client and trying to understand his work.
So when he was describing his role in the military, we had to ask many follow-up questions. And one of the follow-up questions, the answer to that was, well, I carried water. I carried water back and forth. And then the translator asked, was this water for the tanks? He's like, no, it was for the people to drink.
Even though Hassan's client performed nonviolent duties, his link to the army weakens his application. So, Hassan is working to appeal the case. She hopes that reconsideration will give him a second shot.
They'll see that he does not fit the definition of persecution of others.
Meanwhile, at USC, Al-Sarraf is working with the family that fled the bombing attack. Even though their infant child was in the room that was destroyed, he somehow survived. But he'll always be marked by the violence. Now, living in Syria with severe injuries, he needs special imported medicines. Al-Sarraf says that the limitations of refugee life make these especially hard to obtain.
That's obviously a huge expense that they need to pay, but being refugees, their source of income is extremely limited.
Al-Sarraf, along with the rest of the USC branch of IRAP, will continue to work with the family. He hopes to bring them to the United States, where they will find the medical support they need. But even with his frustrations about the hardships refugees face, he's glad to help.
There's this niche that these people need legal assistance, and so to be able to use my legal knowledge and legal education to help them, find a better life it's a very fulfilling experience.
In college, Norland translated a novel about an Iraqi military officer who participated in a U.S.-led revolt. Though promised safety by the troops, he was eventually hung for his involvement with the American military. It's a narrative of loyalty and abandonment that haunts her still.
We sort of have a history as a nation that's kind of vividly portrayed in a few key photographs from our history books of leaving people behind after trying to improve their country in some way, and in Iraq especially.
Norland persists because of what she feels is owed to the most vulnerable sections of the Iraqi population. But helping Iraqi refugees rebuild their lives goes beyond restoring a sense of stability and security for IRAP's clients.
It's also justice. They've done something that should be rewarded, and I'd like to see that happen.
For War News Radio, I'm Ankhi Thakurta.